When Daniel Cross opened his door that stormy December night, he expected to see Mrs. Henderson, the elderly nanny he'd hired through the agency. Instead, he found himself staring at a young woman in designer clothes that had seen better days, her mascara streaked by rain and tears. She clutched a cardboard suitcase, shivering in the doorway like a lost child. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I have nowhere else to go." What Daniel didn't know was that standing before him was Sophia Donovan, the disowned daughter of billionaire Victor Donovan, cast out with nothing but the clothes on her back. This is the story of how two broken souls found each other in the darkness, and how sometimes the greatest fortunes aren't measured in dollars, but in the courage to open your heart when everything seems lost. Please stay with me until the end of this incredible journey, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. The fluorescent lights of Murphy's Auto Repair cast harsh shadows across Daniel Cross's oil-stained coveralls as he wiped the grease from his hands for the 100th time that day. The ancient rag, once white, but now permanently stained black, did little to clean the stubborn residue that seemed to live permanently under his fingernails. His back ached from spending 12 hours hunched over the engine of a 1998 Honda Civic that had seen better decades, and his eyes burned from the combination of exhaustion and the acrid smell of motor oil that clung to everything in the cramped garage. "Another 16-hour day," he muttered to himself, glancing at the cracked face of his father's old watch. The hands pointed to 11:47 p.m., and Daniel felt the familiar weight of guilt settle in his chest. Ella would be asleep by now, curled up in her small bed with the stuffed elephant he'd bought her for her 5th birthday 3 months ago. Mrs. Rodriguez, his elderly neighbor who watched Ella when his shifts ran late, would be dozing in his worn recliner, the television flickering softly in the background. The December wind rattled the garage's metal siding, and Daniel pulled his jacket tighter around his shoulders. Chicago winters were brutal, and this one promised to be particularly harsh. The weatherman on the radio had been warning about a major storm system moving in from the west, bringing with it the kind of snow and ice that could shut down the city for days. As he locked up the garage and walked to his 15-year-old pickup truck, Daniel's thoughts turned to the phone call he'd made earlier that week. The nanny agency had finally called back with a prospect, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Henderson, who came highly recommended and was available to start immediately. The woman had sounded professional on the phone with references from 3 previous families and experience working with single fathers. More importantly, she was affordable, which was crucial given Daniel's financial situation. The drive home took 45 minutes through increasingly empty streets. The storm was already beginning to make its presence known, with fat snowflakes beginning to fall and stick to the windshield faster than his ancient wipers could clear them. Daniel's neighborhood, a collection of modest 2-story homes built in the 1950s, looked peaceful under the growing blanket of white. Most windows were dark, their occupants long since retired for the night. Daniel's house sat at the end of Maple Street, distinguished from its neighbors by the small garden Ella had insisted they plant last spring. Even covered in snow, the remnants of sunflowers and marigolds were visible brown stalks poking through the white like memories of warmer days. The front porch light cast a yellow glow across the steps, and Daniel could see Mrs. Rodriguez's silhouette through the living room window. He parked in the narrow driveway and sat for a moment, gathering the energy to face another evening of quiet conversations with his daughter about her day helping her with homework. He sometimes struggled to understand, and the constant juggling act of being both mother and father to a little girl who deserved so much more than he felt capable of giving. The front door opened before he could reach it, and Mrs. Rodriguez emerged, pulling her heavy coat around her small frame. At 72, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate the world despite arthritic joints and failing eyesight. "Daniel mijo, you look exhausted," she said, in her soft accented English, reaching up to pat his cheek with a weathered hand. "Ella was asking for you all evening. She drew you a picture of the two of you building a snowman." Daniel's heart clenched. "I'm sorry I'm so late, Mrs. Rodriguez. The Carter job ran longer than expected, and I couldn't leave with the transmission half assembled." "No need to apologize, you work hard for that little girl," she replied, but her eyes held a concern that Daniel had been seeing more frequently. "She's sleeping now, but she waited until after 10 before she finally gave in. That child loves you more than anything in this world." After Mrs. Rodriguez left, promising to check the weather and possibly stay overnight if the storm worsened, Daniel climbed the narrow stairs to Ella's room. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear her soft, even breathing. He pushed it open carefully, avoiding the squeaky floorboard that always woke her, and stepped into the small space that somehow contained his entire universe. Ella lay curled on her side, her dark hair spread across the pillow like silk. Her stuffed elephant, affectionately named Mr. Peanuts, was tucked securely under her arm. On the nightstand next to her bed sat the drawing Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned, a crayon masterpiece depicting two stick figures with huge smiles building a snowman almost as tall as they were. At the bottom, in Ella's careful kindergarten handwriting, were the words, "Me and Daddy." Daniel stood there for several minutes watching his daughter sleep and fighting the familiar mixture of love and inadequacy that threatened to overwhelm him. Ella was everything good in his world, the reason he got up every morning and pushed through days that sometimes felt impossible. She had his ex-wife's gentle spirit and curious nature combined with a resilience that amazed him daily. Sarah had left when Ella was 2, claiming that the life of a mechanic's wife wasn't what she had signed up for. The divorce papers had arrived 3 weeks later, along with a note explaining that she was moving to California to find herself and couldn't handle the responsibility of motherhood. Daniel had been granted full custody, and Sarah had disappeared from their lives as completely as if she had never existed. In the 3 years since Daniel had thrown himself into the dual roles of provider and caregiver with a determination that bordered on obsession. He worked extra shifts whenever possible, saved every penny he could, and spent his free time learning how to braid hair, paint fingernails, and navigate the complex social dynamics of kindergarten friendships. But lately, the strain was beginning to show. Ella was getting older, more aware of the fact that other children had mothers who picked them up from school and attended parent-teacher conferences. She had started asking questions that Daniel struggled to answer, like why Mommy had gone away and whether she was ever coming back. The nanny was supposed to help with that. Mrs. Henderson came with stellar recommendations and 15 years of experience. She would be able to provide the kind of consistent care that Daniel's erratic work schedule made impossible. More importantly, she would be there when Ella got home from school, helping with homework, and providing the kind of nurturing presence that Daniel feared he couldn't give on his own. Downstairs, Daniel made himself a cup of instant coffee and sat at the small kitchen table surrounded by the comfortable chaos of their life together. Ella's school papers were scattered across one end of the table, held down by a ceramic mug she had made in art class. Crayons and coloring books occupied the other end, along with a half-finished puzzle depicting a farm scene with chickens and cows. The kitchen was the heart of their home, even though it was barely large enough for 2 people to move around comfortably. The appliances were mismatched and showing their age, but they worked, and Daniel had learned to make them stretch further than they had any right to. The refrigerator was covered with Ella's artwork, held in place by magnets collected from various school fundraisers and church events. As he sipped his coffee, Daniel's mind wandered to the conversation he'd had with his boss earlier that week. Murphy, the garage's owner, was getting ready to retire, and he had hinted that he might be willing to sell the business to Daniel if he could come up with a down payment. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything for him and Ella. Steady income, no more worrying about layoffs, and the chance to build something lasting. But the down payment Murphy was asking for might as well have been $1 million. Even with the raises he'd received over the past 2 years, Daniel was barely keeping his head above water. The mortgage on the house, Ella's expenses, and the cost of childcare ate up almost every penny he earned. The idea of saving enough money to buy the garage seemed impossible, but Daniel couldn't stop thinking about it. The storm outside was intensifying, and the wind howled around the corners of the house with increasing ferocity. Daniel could hear tree branches scraping against the siding, and the old windows rattled in their frames. He made a mental note to check the weather forecast in the morning, and possibly call into work if the roads were too dangerous. Mrs. Henderson was supposed to arrive tomorrow afternoon for an interview and to meet Ella. Daniel had cleaned the house twice, rearranged the living room furniture to make it look more spacious, and even bought fresh flowers for the kitchen table. He wanted to make a good impression to convince her that despite their modest circumstances, they were a family worth investing in. At 1:30 a.m., Daniel finally dragged himself upstairs and fell into bed fully clothed. His last thought before exhaustion claimed him was a prayer to whatever forces governed the universe that Mrs. Henderson would see past their small house and limited budget to the love that filled every corner of their lives. The next day dawned gray and bitter, with the promised storm arriving with a vengeance. By noon, 6 inches of snow had fallen, and the weather service was predicting another 8 before the system moved on. Daniel called the garage and was told that several of the other mechanics couldn't make it in, which meant he would be working alone until the roads cleared. Ella was thrilled by the unexpected snow day, and she spent the morning pressed against the living room window, watching the flakes fall and planning the snow fort. She wanted to build as soon as the storm passed. She chattered excitedly about Mrs. Henderson's visit, asking Daniel a dozen questions about what the new nanny would be like and whether she would know how to make the special braids that Ella had seen in a magazine. "Will she be nice like Mrs. Rodriguez?" Ella asked, settling into Daniel's lap with a picture book about a family of bears. "I think she will be very nice," Daniel replied, smoothing his daughter's hair away from her face. "And she'll be here every day after school, so you won't have to go to the aftercare program anymore." "Will she know how to make cookies?" Ella's eyes were bright with possibility. "And can she help me with my reading? Mrs. Patterson says I need to practice more." Daniel's chest tightened. "I'm sure she can help with all of those things, sweetheart. And if she can't make cookies, we'll teach her how. Okay." By 3 o'clock, the snow had tapered off to occasional flurries, but the wind continued to whip around the house with enough force to make the power lines sway ominously. Daniel had called Mrs. Henderson twice to confirm that she was still planning to come despite the weather, and both times she had assured him that a little snow wouldn't keep her away. At 4:15, Ella stationed herself by the front window, her nose pressed against the cold glass, as she watched for any sign of movement on their street. Most of their neighbors had apparently decided to wait out the storm indoors, and the usual afternoon traffic was noticeably absent. "There's a car," Ella announced, bouncing on her toes. "It's slowing down. I think it's her." Daniel joined his daughter at the window, watching as a small sedan crept down Maple Street, its headlights cutting through the growing dusk. The car stopped in front of their house, and Daniel could see a figure inside, silhouetted against the dashboard lights. "Go sit on the couch, sweetheart," Daniel instructed, smoothing his hair and checking his reflection in the hall mirror. "Let me answer the door first, and then I'll introduce you." The doorbell rang at exactly 4:30, and Daniel took a deep breath before opening it. What he saw made him step back in confusion. Standing on his front porch was not Mrs. Henderson, the experienced middle-aged nanny he was expecting. Instead, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 25 stood shivering in the falling snow. Her blonde hair was plastered to her head by melted snowflakes, and her makeup had smeared, leaving dark tracks down her pale cheeks. She wore what had once been an expensive coat, but it was now wrinkled and damp, hanging loosely on her thin frame. In her hands, she clutched a battered cardboard suitcase that looked like it might fall apart at any moment. Her shoes' designer heels that were completely inappropriate for the weather were soaked through, and Daniel could see that her feet were red with cold. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They were the kind of blue that belonged in magazine advertisements, but they held a desperation that made Daniel's protective instincts surge to life. This was someone who had reached the end of their rope, someone who had nowhere else to turn. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "I have nowhere else to go." Daniel stared at her, his mind racing through possibilities. Was this some kind of mistake? Had she gotten the wrong address? Was she in some kind of trouble? "I think you might have the wrong house," he said carefully, not moving from the doorway. "I'm expecting someone from the Nanny agency." The young woman's face crumpled, and fresh tears began to flow down her cheeks. "I know this sounds crazy, and I know you don't know me, but I saw your listing for a nanny position, and I'm desperate. I don't have anywhere else to go, and I thought maybe if you'd just give me a chance." "Daddy, who is it?" Ella's voice came from behind him, and Daniel turned to see his daughter peering around his legs, her eyes wide with curiosity. The young woman's gaze fell on Ella, and something in her expression shifted. The desperation was still there, but it was joined by something else, a gentleness that seemed to transform her entire face. "Hi there," she said softly, crouching down to Ella's eye level, despite the snow soaking through her clothes. "You must be Ella. I'm Sophia." Ella stepped forward, studying Sophia with the frank curiosity of childhood. "You look cold," she observed, "and sad. Daddy, can she come in? It's really snowy out there." Daniel found himself caught between his instincts to protect his daughter and the undeniable fact that no one should be standing outside in this weather. There was something about Sophia that didn't fit the picture of someone who posed a threat. Her desperation seemed genuine, and there was a quality about her, a vulnerability, that spoke to the part of him that had always been drawn to help others. "Please," Sophia repeated, looking up at Daniel from her crouched position. "I know this isn't how these things usually work, but I'm good with children. I can provide references, and I'm willing to work for whatever you can afford. I just need a chance." The wind chose that moment to gust with particular force, sending snow swirling across the porch and making Sophia shiver violently. Daniel saw her teeth chattering, saw the way her hands shook as she tried to maintain her grip on the cardboard suitcase. "Daddy, she's really cold," Ella said, tugging on Daniel's pants leg. "We should let her come in and get warm. Remember what you always say about helping people." Daniel looked down at his daughter, then back at the young woman on his porch. Every logical part of his brain was screaming warnings. This wasn't how you hired childcare. You didn't invite strangers into your home, especially when you had a 5-year-old to protect. But there was something in Sophia's eyes, something that spoke to the part of him that understood what it meant to be alone and desperate. "All right," he said finally, stepping back from the doorway. "Come in out of the cold. But I should tell you I'm expecting someone from the agency, and Mrs. Henderson isn't coming," Sophia said quietly, stepping into the warmth of the house and setting her suitcase down carefully. "The agency called this morning to cancel. Something about the weather and a family emergency." Daniel frowned. "They didn't call me. The phone lines have been acting up all day because of the storm," Sophia explained, unwrapping a thin scarf from around her neck. "I tried calling you several times, but I kept getting a busy signal. I thought maybe..." Maybe if I came in person I could explain. There were holes in her story, and Daniel knew it. But as he watched Sophia remove her soaked coat, revealing a sweater that had clearly seen better days, he found himself more curious than suspicious. This was obviously someone who had fallen on hard times, but there was something about her demeanor, a way of holding herself, that spoke of a different kind of upbringing. "Can I make you some tea?" Ella asked, standing on her tiptoes to look Sophia in the eye. "Daddy taught me how, but he has to turn on the stove." Sophia's smile was the first genuine expression Daniel had seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. "I would love some tea, Ella. That's very thoughtful of you." As they moved into the living room, Daniel found himself studying Sophia more closely. Her clothes, despite their current state, were clearly expensive. The sweater was cashmere, and even though her shoes were ruined by the snow, he could see that they had cost more than he made in a week. This was someone who had money, or at least had access to it recently. "So," Daniel said, settling into his recliner, while Ella busied herself arranging cushions on the couch for Sophia. "Tell me about your experience with children." Sophia's hands fidgeted with the hem of her sweater, and Daniel noticed that her nails, while perfectly manicured, showed signs of recent stress, small chips in the polished cuticles that had been worried at. "I don't have professional experience," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've always been good with kids. I have younger cousins, and I used to help take care of them when they were small." It wasn't much of a resume, and Daniel knew it. But something about the way Sophia looked at Ella with genuine interest and warmth made him hesitate to dismiss her immediately. "What about references?" he asked. "Previous employers?" Sophia's face went pale, and she looked down at her hands. "That's complicated. I recently had a falling out with my family, and I can't use them as references. But I promise you, Mr. Cross, I'm responsible and hardworking, and I would never do anything to put Ella in danger." "Why do you need this job?" Daniel pressed, his protective instincts warring with his curiosity. "I mean, if you don't mind me asking, you don't exactly look like someone who usually works as a nanny." The question hung in the air between them, and Daniel could see Sophia struggling with how much to reveal. Her blue eyes filled with tears again, and she took a shaky breath before speaking. "My father disowned me," she said simply. 3 days ago, he told me that I was no longer his daughter, that I had disappointed him for the last time. He took away my credit cards, my bank accounts, everything. I've been staying in my car since then. But with this storm—" Her voice trailed off, and she gestured helplessly toward the window. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. The protective anger that had been simmering since she'd appeared on his doorstep was being replaced by something else, sympathy, and a recognition of the kind of desperation he'd felt himself in the months after Sarah left. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "That must be incredibly difficult." "I know this isn't ideal." Sophia continued, her words coming faster now, as if she was afraid he might change his mind. "I know you were expecting someone with experience and references, but I'm willing to learn, and I'll work harder than anyone you could hire through an agency. I just need a chance to prove myself." Ella, who had been listening to the conversation with the intensity that children bring to adult discussions they don't quite understand, suddenly spoke up. "Are you sad because your daddy was mean to you?" she asked, settling onto the couch next to Sophia with the easy familiarity of childhood. Sophia's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she managed a small smile. "Yes, sweetheart. I am sad about that." "My mommy went away too," Ella said matter-of-factly. "But Daddy says that sometimes people leave, but it doesn't mean we did anything wrong. Maybe your daddy will change his mind." The simple wisdom of childhood hung in the air, and Daniel saw Sophia's composure finally break. She pressed her hands to her face and sobbed, not the delicate tears of someone seeking sympathy, but the raw, exhausted crying of someone who had been holding themselves together through sheer force of will. Ella, with the instinctive kindness that never failed to amaze Daniel, reached over and patted Sophia's shoulder. "It's okay to cry," she said seriously. "Daddy cries sometimes too, but only when he thinks I'm not looking." Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks, but before he could say anything, Sophia looked up, her eyes red but grateful. "Thank you, Ella," she whispered. "You're very kind." "Do you want to see my room?" Ella asked, bouncing slightly with excitement. "I have a dollhouse that Daddy built and lots of books. And maybe after you're done being sad, we could play a game." Daniel watched the interaction with a mixture of amazement and concern. Ella had always been friendly with new people, but there was something different about the way she was responding to Sophia, a protective instinct that mirrored his own. "I would love to see your room," Sophia said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "But maybe I should talk to your daddy first, okay?" Ella nodded solemnly and ran upstairs, calling back that she was going to pick out the best book to show Sophia. In the sudden quiet of the living room, Daniel found himself really looking at the young woman sitting on his couch. Stripped of the desperation and tears, there was something almost ethereal about her, a delicate beauty that spoke of expensive salons and designer clothes. But there was also a steel underneath a determination that he recognized because he saw it in the mirror every morning. "What's your last name?" he asked quietly. Sophia hesitated for a long moment, and Daniel could see her weighing her options. Finally, she lifted her chin and met his eyes directly. "Donovan," she said. "Sophia Donovan." The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Even someone who didn't follow business news would recognize that surname. Victor Donovan was one of the wealthiest men in Chicago, a real estate mogul whose name was attached to half the skyscrapers in the downtown area. His face appeared regularly on magazine covers and business sections, usually accompanied by stories about his latest acquisition or charitable donation. "As in Victor Donovan?" Daniel asked, though he already knew the answer. Sophia nodded miserably. "Yes, that Victor Donovan. And before you ask, yes, I'm his daughter. Or I was, until 3 days ago." The revelation explained everything: the expensive clothes, the perfect manicure, the way she carried herself, despite her current circumstances. But it also raised a dozen new questions. "What happened?" Daniel asked, leaning forward in his chair. "I mean, if you don't mind me asking, what could make someone like Victor Donovan disown his own daughter?" Sophia was quiet for so long that Daniel thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I fell in love with someone he didn't approve of," she said. "Someone he considered beneath our family's status. When I refused to break up with him, my father gave me an ultimatum: my boyfriend or my family. I chose love." She laughed bitterly, a sound that held no humor. "Turns out I was wrong about the love part too. As soon as Marcus found out that I'd been cut off, that there wouldn't be any more expensive dinners or luxury vacations, he disappeared faster than you can imagine. Left me a note saying he couldn't handle dating someone who was financially unstable." Daniel felt a surge of anger on her behalf. He'd been abandoned too, though, in different circumstances, and he knew the particular kind of pain that came with discovering that someone you trusted didn't really know you at all. "I'm sorry," he said again. That's awful." "The funny thing is," Sophia continued, staring out the window at the still falling snow, "I always thought my father loved me. I mean, he was demanding and controlling, but I thought that came from caring. It wasn't until he looked me in the eye and told me I was dead to him that I realized I'd never been anything more than a reflection of his success. There was so much pain in her voice that Daniel had to resist the urge to reach out and comfort her. This was someone who had lost everything in the span of a few days: family, love, financial security, and probably most of her friends as well. "So you decided to become a nanny?" he asked. Sophia shrugged. "I've been driving around for 3 days trying to figure out what to do. I don't have any real job skills, I've never had to work before. But I saw your listing and I thought maybe if I could prove I was capable of something, anything, maybe I could start to build a life for myself." "But why here?" Daniel pressed. "I mean, no offense, but this isn't exactly the kind of neighborhood someone like you would usually find themselves in." "That's exactly why I chose it," Sophia said, with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who only cared about money and status. I wanted to find somewhere real, somewhere that a person's worth wasn't measured by their bank account." Before Daniel could respond, Ella came thundering down the stairs, her arms full of books and toys. "I brought options," she announced, dumping her treasures on the coffee table. "We have princesses and dragons and this one about a girl who builds robots. And I brought my favorite doll in case you want to play house." Sophia's face lit up as she examined Ella's offerings, and Daniel found himself watching the interaction with growing fascination. There was nothing artificial about the way Sophia responded to his daughter, no condescending baby talk or forced enthusiasm. Instead, she treated Ella like a person asking genuine questions about her preferences and listening to the answers with real interest. "This one looks fascinating," Sophia said, picking up a book about a young inventor. "Can you tell me about it?" As Ella launched into an animated description of the story, Daniel found himself studying Sophia with new eyes. Yes, she was Victor Donovan's daughter, and yes, she was obviously out of her element. But watching her with Ella, he could see something that all the agency recommendations in the world couldn't guarantee: genuine warmth and affection for children. The storm outside was intensifying again, and Daniel realized that even if he wanted to send Sophia away, it wouldn't be safe for her to drive in these conditions. The responsible thing to do would be to let her stay the night and make a decision in the morning when the roads were clear. But as he watched Sophia help Ella build an elaborate castle out of couch cushions, laughing at his daughter's creative engineering solutions, Daniel found himself thinking that maybe the universe had sent exactly what they needed, just not in the package he'd been expecting. The evening passed more quickly than Daniel could have imagined. Sophia helped Ella with her reading homework, patiently sounding out difficult words and celebrating each small victory with genuine enthusiasm. When dinner time arrived, she insisted on helping in the kitchen, and though she admitted she'd never cooked anything more complicated than toast, she followed Daniel's instructions with careful attention to detail. Watching her stand at his stove stirring a pot of spaghetti sauce while Ella set the table, Daniel felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the sense of completeness that came from having a family around the dinner table. It was a dangerous feeling, he knew, because Sophia was a stranger who would probably move on as soon as she got back on her feet. But for tonight, in his warm kitchen, with snow falling outside, he allowed himself to pretend that this was what normal looked like. After dinner, Sophia read Ella 3 bedtime stories, doing different voices for all the characters, and making his daughter giggle with delight. When it was time for bed, Ella hugged Sophia goodnight with the easy affection she usually reserved for Mrs. Rodriguez. "I like her, Daddy," Ella whispered as Daniel tucked her in. "She's sad, but she's nice. Can she stay?" Daniel smoothed his daughter's hair and kissed her forehead. "We'll see, sweetheart. Sleep tight." Downstairs, Sophia was washing the dinner dishes, moving carefully around the unfamiliar kitchen. She had changed out of her damp clothes into a spare sweater Daniel had found for her, and with her hair dried and pulled back in a simple ponytail, she looked younger and more vulnerable than she had when she'd first appeared on his doorstep. "You don't have to do that," Daniel said, joining her at the sink. "I want to," Sophia replied, not looking up from the plate she was scrubbing. "You've been incredibly kind to me tonight, more than I had any right to expect. This is the least I can do." They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Daniel found himself acutely aware of her presence, the way she moved with unconscious grace, the faint scent of the shampoo she'd borrowed from his bathroom, the careful way she handled Ella's favorite mug. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said, suddenly breaking the quiet. "Sure. Why did you let me in tonight? I mean, really. You could have called the police or told me to find a shelter. Most people would have." Daniel considered the question as he dried a serving bowl. "I guess because I know what it's like to feel like you're completely alone," he said finally. "When my ex-wife left, I thought my world was ending. If it hadn't been for Ella, I probably would have fallen apart completely. And I remember thinking that if just one person had reached out, had offered help without judging my situation, it would have made all the difference." Sophia nodded slowly. "What was she like, your ex-wife?" "Sarah was complicated," Daniel said, choosing his words carefully. "She was beautiful and smart, and when we first met, I thought she was everything I'd ever wanted. But she had very specific ideas about what her life should look like, and being married to a mechanic with a baby wasn't part of that vision." "I'm sorry," Sophia said softly. "That must have been devastating." "It was," Daniel admitted. "But you know what? In some ways it was also liberating. I stopped trying to be someone I wasn't, and started focusing on being the best father I could be. And Ella, she's taught me more about love and resilience than I ever thought possible." Sophia smiled, the first truly happy expression he'd seen from her. "She's an amazing little girl. You've done an incredible job raising her." The compliment hit Daniel harder than he'd expected, and he felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." "Why, because of who my father is?" "No," Daniel said quickly. "Because of how you are with her. I've seen a lot of people interact with Ella over the years, and most adults either talk down to her or ignore her completely. But you see her, really see her. That's rare." Sophia finished washing the last glass and turned to face him, leaning against the counter. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel nodded. "Tonight is the first time in years that I've felt like myself," she said. "Not Victor Donovan's daughter, not Marcus's girlfriend, just me. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Daniel replied. "I felt the same way after Sarah left. Terrifying, but also kind of freeing." "Exactly." Sophia paused, seeming to gather her courage. "Daniel, I know this is asking a lot, but would you consider giving me a trial period? Just a week, maybe 2. I promise I'll work harder than anyone you could hire, and if it doesn't work out, I'll leave with no hard feelings." Daniel looked at her standing in his kitchen wearing his old sweater and asking for a chance to prove herself, and felt something shift decisively in his chest. Maybe it was the way she'd connected with Ella, or the quiet strength she'd shown despite everything she'd been through. Maybe it was simply the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who had lost everything and was trying to build something new from the ashes. "All right," he said, surprised by his own decision. 2 weeks. But I should warn you, the pay isn't much, and the hours can be unpredictable." Sophia's face lit up with such genuine joy that Daniel felt his breath catch. "Thank you," she whispered, and for a moment he thought she might cry again. "You won't regret this, I promise." As they finished cleaning the kitchen and Daniel showed Sophia to the small guest room that doubled as his home office, he found himself wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. Tomorrow, he would have to explain to Mrs. Rodriguez why there was a strange young woman sleeping in his house. He would have to figure out how to navigate the practical details of employing someone who had never held a real job. And he would have to guard against the dangerous warmth he felt whenever Sophia smiled. But tonight, listening to the storm rage outside while his daughter slept safely upstairs, and Sophia settled into the guest room, with quiet gratitude, Daniel allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, the universe had finally decided to cut him a break. The last thing he saw before turning off the lights was Sophia standing at the guest room window, looking out at the snow-covered street with an expression of wonder, as if she was seeing the world with new eyes. And in that moment, Daniel realized that whatever happened in the next 2 weeks, all of their lives had just changed in ways none of them could have imagined. The morning light filtered through the guest room curtains, casting soft shadows across Sophia's face as she slowly opened her eyes. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, the storm, the desperate knock on Daniel's door, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who had given her a chance when she had nowhere else to turn. She could hear voices downstairs, the quiet murmur of conversation, punctuated by Ella's bright laughter. The sound pulled at something deep in her chest, a longing for the kind, simple domestic happiness that had always felt just out of reach in her father's mansion. Their mornings had been orchestrated affairs, staff appearing silently to serve breakfast on fine china, while Victor reviewed financial reports and barely acknowledged her presence. Sophia slipped out of bed and padded to the window, pulling back the curtain to reveal a world transformed by snow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine white landscape that sparkled in the early sunlight. Children were already outside building snowmen and engaging in snowball fights, their delighted shrieks carrying on the crisp air. She had slept better than she had in days, wrapped in the borrowed warmth of Daniel's old sweater and surrounded by the comforting sounds of a house that was truly lived in. No marble floors or crystal chandeliers, just creaking floorboards and radiators that clanged softly through the night. It was the most beautiful place she had ever woken up. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Sophia, are you awake?" Ella's voice was barely above a whisper, as if she was trying not to disturb her, but couldn't contain her excitement. "Come in, sweetheart," Sophia called quickly, running her fingers through her hair in an attempt to look presentable. Ella burst through the door, already dressed in snow pants and a bright pink coat, her dark hair braided into 2 neat plaits that Daniel must have managed before work. "Daddy said I could ask if you want to come outside and build a snowman with me. He had to go to work early because of all the cars that got stuck last night. But Mrs. Rodriguez is here, and she said she'd make hot chocolate for after." Sophia's heart clenched at the pure joy in the little girl's voice. When was the last time someone had been this excited to spend time with her? Marcus had always seemed slightly bored by her presence, and her father had treated their interactions like business meetings. "I would love to build a snowman with you," Sophia said, crouching down to Ella's level. "But I should probably find some warmer clothes first. I don't think my shoes from yesterday would work very well in the snow." Ella's face scrunched up in concentration. "Daddy has some old boots in the closet, and I think Mrs. Rodriguez might have a spare coat. She always brings extra stuff because she says Chicago weather is unpredictable." 20 minutes later, Sophia found herself bundled in mismatched winter gear, following Ella into the backyard, with the enthusiasm of someone experiencing snow play for the first time. Which in many ways she was. Her childhood winters had been spent in ski lodges in Aspen or private resorts in Switzerland, where the snow was merely a backdrop for carefully orchestrated photo opportunities. First, we need to make the bottom ball really, really big, Ella explained with the seriousness of a master craftsman. Daddy taught me that the secret is to roll it slow so it doesn't fall apart. They worked together in comfortable silence, rolling the snowball across the yard, until it was too heavy for Ella to push alone. Sophia marveled at the simple pleasure of the cold air stinging her cheeks, and the satisfaction of watching their creation take shape through nothing more than persistence and teamwork. "Tell me about your daddy," Sophia said, as they started on the middle section. "What's he like when he's not at work?" Ella's face lit up with obvious adoration. "He's the best daddy in the whole world. He reads me stories every night even when he's really tired, and he makes funny voices for all the characters. And he taught me how to ride my bike without training wheels, and he never got mad when I kept falling down." "That sounds wonderful," Sophia said, thinking of her own father, who had hired tutors and nannies to handle such mundane parental duties. "He gets sad sometimes, though." Ella continued, her small hands patting snow into place with careful precision. "He thinks I don't notice, but I do. Mrs. Rodriguez says it's because he works too hard and doesn't have anyone to take care of him." The observation hit Sophia with unexpected force. She had been so focused on her own problems, her own desperate need for shelter and purpose, that she hadn't fully considered what Daniel might be struggling with. The exhaustion she had seen in his face the night before, the careful way he moved around the house as if he was used to carrying the weight of everything alone. "What about your mommy?" Sophia asked gently, remembering the brief mention of an ex-wife. Ella's expression grew thoughtful. "She went away when I was little. Daddy says sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt, but it doesn't mean I did anything wrong. I used to be sad about it, but now I think maybe it's okay, because it's just me and Daddy, and we're a good team." The matter-of-fact way Ella discussed her mother's abandonment made Sophia's chest tighten with protective anger. How could anyone walk away from this bright, loving child? How could Sarah have looked at Daniel's devotion and Ella's pure heart and decided it wasn't enough? "You are a very good team," Sophia agreed, helping Ella lift the second snowball onto the first. "Your daddy is lucky to have someone so special to take care of." "Maybe you could help us be an even better team," Ella said, with the straightforward honesty that only children possess. "Daddy needs someone to take care of him too, and I'm too little to reach the high shelves." Before Sophia could respond to this surprisingly astute observation, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at the back door, waving them inside with promises of hot chocolate and warm cookies. As they trudged back toward the house, snow-covered and laughing, Sophia caught sight of their reflection in the kitchen window and felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. They looked like a family, a mother and daughter coming in from play, faces bright with cold and happiness. Inside, Mrs. Rodriguez bustled around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had been managing households for decades. She was a small woman, with silver hair and kind eyes, and she studied Sophia with the careful assessment of someone whose job it was to protect the people she cared about. "So, you're the young lady who appeared on Daniel's doorstep last night," she said, handing Sophia a steaming mug of hot chocolate topped with marshmallows. "Ella hasn't stopped talking about you since I arrived this morning. Mrs. Rodriguez makes the best hot chocolate in the world," Ella announced, settling onto her chair with her own mug. "She puts cinnamon in it, and sometimes vanilla if we've been extra good." "It's delicious," Sophia said, taking a careful sip and feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you for welcoming me into your routine. I know this must be strange, having a stranger show up unexpectedly." Mrs. Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. "Daniel is a good judge of character, and Ella is an excellent judge of hearts. If they both trust you, that's enough for me. But I hope you don't mind me saying you don't look like any nanny I've ever met." Sophia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I know I'm not what Daniel was expecting. I don't have formal experience with children, but I'm willing to learn. I promise I'll do everything I can to take good care of Ella. Experience can be taught, Mrs. Rodriguez said wisely, settling into her own chair with a grunt of satisfaction. But kindness that comes from the soul. I watched you with our little one this morning, and I saw kindness. The simple acceptance in the older woman's voice made Sophia's eyes fill with tears. When was the last time someone had seen something good in her without first calculating what she could do for them? Can Sophia help me make cookies for Daddy? Ella asked, bouncing slightly in her chair. I want to surprise him when he gets home. I think that's a wonderful idea, Mrs. Rodriguez agreed. But first, let's get you both warmed up properly. Sophia, dear, why don't you tell me about yourself while we wait for the feeling to come back to our fingers? Over the next hour, as they sat around Daniel's kitchen table, Sophia found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She told them about growing up in a house where love was conditional, about the pressure to be perfect that had followed her from childhood into adulthood. She talked about Marcus, about how she had thought she'd found someone who loved her for herself, only to discover that he had been just as interested in her father's money as everyone else. Miss Rodriguez listened without judgment, occasionally asking gentle questions that encouraged Sophia to dig deeper into her feelings. Ella, meanwhile, provided a running commentary that was both heartbreaking and hilarious in its honesty. That Marcus sounds like a meanie, Ella declared when Sophia finished explaining about the breakup. Good riddance to bad rubbish, that's what Daddy always says. Ella Maria Cross, where did you learn language like that? Mrs. Rodriguez scolded, though her eyes were twinkling with amusement. From Daddy when he's working on cars, Ella replied unrepentantly. He says it about the customers who try to cheat him. As the morning progressed, Sophia found herself falling into the rhythm of the household with surprising ease. She helped Ella with a math worksheet, patiently explaining addition problems while Mrs. Rodriguez prepared lunch. She folded laundry that had been sitting in a basket for days, marveling at the simple domesticity of matching tiny socks and smoothing out Ella's school clothes. Everything about this house was different from what she was used to. The furniture was mismatched and well-worn, showing the kind of loving use that came from being truly lived in. There were no fresh flowers arranged by staff, no pristine surfaces that couldn't be touched. Instead, there were crayon marks on the kitchen table, a pile of library books on the coffee table, and photographs covering every available surface, pictures of Daniel and Ella at the zoo, at birthday parties, building the snowman they had attempted that morning. It was chaos and warmth and love all rolled into one, and Sophia had never felt more at home anywhere in her life. When Daniel called during his lunch break to check on them, Ella grabbed the phone with both hands, chattering excitedly about their morning adventures. We built the biggest snowman ever, and Sophia helped, and we're making you cookies, she announced, practically vibrating with excitement. And Mrs. Rodriguez says Sophia has a good heart, and I think she should stay forever and ever. Sophia could hear Daniel's quiet laughter through the phone, and the sound made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. That sounds like a perfect morning, sweetheart, he said. Is Sophia there? Can I talk to her for a minute? Ella thrust the phone at Sophia with the enthusiasm of a child who had successfully completed an important mission. Daddy wants to talk to you. Hello, Sophia said, suddenly nervous, in a way that seemed ridiculous, given everything they had already been through together. Hi. Daniel's voice was warm and slightly rough, probably from the cold. I just wanted to check and make sure you were settling in okay. I know this morning probably felt overwhelming. Actually, it's been wonderful, Sophia said honestly. Ella is amazing, and Mrs. Rodriguez has been incredibly kind. I hope it's okay that I helped with some household things. I just wanted to be useful. More than okay, Daniel replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I can't tell you how much I appreciate you jumping in like that. Most people would have expected to ease into the routine gradually." "I'm not most people," Sophia said, then immediately wondered if that sounded presumptuous. "No," Daniel agreed quietly. "You're definitely not. I'll be home around 6 tonight. We can talk more then about how you want to structure things going forward." After he hung up, Sophia found herself staring at the phone with a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. She was already dreading the moment when Daniel would walk through the door and she would have to prove that his impulsive decision to trust her hadn't been a mistake. The afternoon passed in a blur of domestic activity. Sophia helped Ella with reading practice, listening patiently as the little girl sounded out words and celebrating each small victory with genuine enthusiasm. They baked chocolate chip cookies, and Sophia learned that cooking was much more enjoyable when your assistant was a chattering 5-year-old who thought measuring cups were the most fascinating invention ever created. Mrs. Rodriguez left at 4, but not before pulling Sophia aside for a private conversation. "That man has been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders for 3 years, she said quietly, glancing toward the living room where Ella was playing with blocks. "He's a good father, but he's forgotten how to take care of himself. Maybe you can remind him." "I'm just the nanny," Sophia protested, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Something was happening between her and this family, something that felt bigger and more important than a simple employment arrangement. "Honey, I've been alive for 72 years, and I know the difference between someone who's just passing through and someone who's meant to stay," Mrs. Rodriguez said with a knowing smile. "Daniel needs someone who sees him for who he really is, not just what he can provide. And that little girl needs a woman in her life who will love her unconditionally." The words hung in the air long after Mrs. Rodriguez left, and Sophia found herself thinking about them as she and Ella prepared for Daniel's return. They had decided to surprise him with a home-cooked meal, and while Sophia's culinary skills were limited, she was determined to create something that would show him how grateful she was for the chance he had given her. As 5:30 approached, Ella stationed herself by the front window, watching for Daniel's truck with the intensity of a soldier on guard duty. Sophia busied herself setting the table using the good dishes she had found in the china cabinet and arranging the cookies they had made as a centerpiece. "I see him," Ella shrieked, bouncing on her toes. "He's here! He's here!" Sophia's heart began to race as she heard Daniel's key in the front door. This was the moment of truth. Would he be pleased with how the day had gone, or would he realize he had made a terrible mistake in trusting a stranger with his most precious possession? "Something smells incredible," Daniel called as he hung up his coat, and Sophia felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "We made dinner," Ella announced, throwing herself into her father's arms with the abandon of someone who knew they would always be caught. "And cookies, and Sophia helped me with my reading, and we built a snowman, and Mrs. Rodriguez says she has a good heart." Daniel looked over Ella's head to where Sophia stood in the kitchen doorway, and the smile that spread across his face made her knees feel weak. "Is that so?" he said, his eyes never leaving Sophia's face. "It sounds like you two had quite an adventure." "We did," Sophia said softly. "I hope it's okay that I took some liberties with the routine. I just wanted to make sure Ella had a good day." "More than okay," Daniel replied, setting Ella down and walking toward the kitchen. "I can't remember the last time I came home to a house that smelled like home cooking." They sat down to dinner, a simple meal of roasted chicken and vegetables that Sophia had somehow managed not to ruin, and Daniel listened with obvious delight as Ella recounted every detail of their day. Sophia found herself watching him carefully, noting the way his shoulders relaxed as he settled into his chair. The genuine laughter, that seemed to come easier than it had the night before. "The cookies are really good," Daniel said, biting into one of their chocolate chip creations. "Did you follow a recipe, or is this some secret family formula?" "Mrs. Rodriguez helped," Sophia admitted. "I've never actually baked before, but Ella was very patient with my learning curve." "Never baked before?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What kind of childhood did you have?" The question was asked lightly, but Sophia felt the weight of it. How could she explain growing up in a house where meals appeared as if by magic, where domestic tasks were handled by an army of staff members whose names she had never bothered to learn? "The kind where everything was done for me," she said finally. "I never learned how to take care of myself, let alone anyone else. But I'm learning now." Something in her tone must have conveyed the deeper meaning, because Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "Learning is good," he said gently. "Some of the most important things can't be taught in schools anyway." After dinner, they settled into an easy routine that felt like it had been years in the making. Daniel helped Ella with her bath while Sophia cleaned the kitchen, and then they all gathered in the living room for story time. Ella had chosen 3 books, and she insisted that Sophia read one while Daniel handled the others. As Sophia read about a brave little mouse who saved her village from a terrible storm, she was acutely aware of Daniel watching her. Not with suspicion or evaluation, but with something that looked like wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe that this domestic scene was real. When it was time for Ella to go to bed, she hugged Sophia goodnight with the same warmth she showed her father. "Will you still be here in the morning?" she asked. Her small arms wrapped around Sophia's neck. "If your daddy wants me to be," Sophia replied, glancing at Daniel over Ella's head. "I want you to be here forever," Ella said, with the matter-of-fact certainty of childhood. "You make everything better." After Ella was settled for the night, Daniel and Sophia found themselves alone in the living room for the first time since that morning. The silence stretched between them, comfortable but charged with unspoken questions. "So," Daniel said, finally settling into his recliner, "how was your first day as a nanny?" "Harder than I expected," Sophia said, honestly, curling up on the couch with her legs tucked under her. "But also better. Ella is incredible, Daniel. You've raised an amazing little girl." "She likes you," Daniel observed. "And that's not something that happens easily. Ella is usually pretty cautious around new people." "Maybe she recognizes a fellow member of the abandoned children's club," Sophia said, trying to make light of it, but hearing the bitterness in her own voice. Daniel's expression grew serious. "Is that how you see yourself, as abandoned?" The question hit deeper than Sophia had expected, and she found herself fighting back tears. "Isn't that what I am? My father threw me away the moment I stopped being useful to him. Marcus disappeared the second I became a liability instead of an asset. I'm 25 years old, and I've never had anyone in my life who loved me just because I existed." "That's not true," Daniel said quietly. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because I watched you with Ella today," Daniel replied, leaning forward in his chair. "I saw the way you looked at her, the way you listened to her stories, like they were the most important things in the world. That's not something you can fake, Sophia. That's not something someone learns from a manual or a training course. That's love, pure and simple." Sophia stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Daniel, and the way she responded to you," he continued, "the way she opened up and trusted you completely." Children know things, Sophia. They can sense when someone genuinely cares about them. Ella hasn't connected with anyone this quickly since her mother left. The comparison to Sarah hung in the air between them, and Sophia felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. "I'm not trying to replace her mother," she said quickly. I know I'm just here temporarily, until I can figure out what to do with my life. Are you? Daniel asked. Just here temporarily. The question caught Sophia off guard. Was she just passing through using this family as a convenient stopping point while she figured out her next move? The thought had certainly occurred to her this was obviously not where someone like her belonged long-term. But watching Daniel's face in the soft lamplight, remembering the feeling of Ella's small hand in hers as they built their snowman, Sophia realized that leaving was the last thing she wanted to do. I don't know, she admitted. I came here because I was desperate and had nowhere else to go. But now, I don't want to think about leaving. Is that terrible of me? It's honest, Daniel said, and honesty is more than I've gotten from most people in my life. They talked until well past midnight, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. Sophia told Daniel about the loneliness of growing up in a mansion full of staff, but empty of real warmth. Daniel talked about the panic he had felt when Sarah left, the terror of being solely responsible for another human being when he barely felt capable of taking care of himself. As the conversation wound down and they prepared to go their separate ways for the night, Daniel caught Sophia's hand as she passed his chair. Thank you, he said simply. For today, for Ella, for everything. I know this isn't what you planned for your life, but I'm grateful that circumstances brought you here. Sophia looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. I think maybe this is exactly what I was supposed to find, she said softly. I just never knew it before. That night, as Sophia lay in the guest room, listening to the old house settle around her, she realized that for the first time in her life she wasn't planning her next move. She wasn't calculating how to escape or improve her situation. Instead, she was simply existing in the moment, grateful for the warmth of borrowed blankets and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another day with Ella's laughter and Daniel's quiet strength. She had fallen asleep in a mansion and woken up in a home, and the difference was everything. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the quiet morning air, followed by a string of colorful language that would have made a sailor blush. Sophia rushed to the kitchen window to see Daniel standing beside his truck, staring down at what remained of his coffee mug scattered across the icy driveway. It was their third week together, and she had learned to read the subtle signs of his frustration, the tension in his shoulders, the way he ran his hands through his hair when he thought no one was looking. Daddy said a bad word, Ella observed from her perch at the breakfast table, not looking up from the elaborate castle she was constructing out of her pancakes. Sometimes grown-ups say things they shouldn't when they're having a rough morning, Sophia replied, already moving toward the door. Finish your breakfast, sweetheart. I'll be right back. She grabbed her coat and Daniel's spare travel mug from the cabinet, filling it with the coffee she had learned to make exactly the way he liked it, strong enough to wake the dead with just a splash of cream. The morning ritual had become second nature to her, one of dozens of small ways she had found to make his life a little easier. Outside, Daniel was crouched on the frozen ground, picking up pieces of ceramic with movements that spoke of barely controlled anger. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air, and Sophia could sense that his hands were already red with cold. Here, she said softly, offering him the steaming mug. Let me help with that. Daniel looked up at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her chest tighten. It wasn't just frustration about a broken coffee mug. It was the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying too much for too long. You don't have to clean up my messes, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I want to, Sophia replied, kneeling beside him, despite the cold seeping through her jeans. Besides, it's just a mug. You look like you haven't slept in days. Daniel accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping his hands around the warm ceramic as if it were a lifeline. "Murphy called last night," he said quietly. "He's found another buyer for the garage. Someone who can put down cash immediately." Sophia's hands stilled on the pieces of broken mug. Over the past 3 weeks, she had heard Daniel talk about his dream of owning Murphy's auto repair, with the kind of quiet longing that broke her heart. It represented everything he wanted for his future: stability, independence, the chance to build something lasting for Ella. "I'm sorry," she said, though the words felt inadequate. "I know how much that meant to you." "It's probably for the best anyway," Daniel said with forced lightness. "I was fooling myself thinking I could ever come up with that kind of money. Guys like me don't get to own businesses. We just work for other people until we're too old to be useful anymore." The bitter resignation in his voice sparked something fierce in Sophia's chest. She had watched Daniel work himself to exhaustion every day, had seen him sacrifice his own needs without hesitation to provide for his daughter. He was one of the best men she had ever known, and the idea that he might give up on his dreams made her want to fight someone. "That's not true," she said firmly. "You're not guys like you. You're Daniel Cross, and you're brilliant with engines, and you care more about doing quality work than making a quick profit. Any business would be lucky to have you as an owner." Daniel's laugh held no humor. "Tell that to the bank that turned down my loan application. Apparently being a good mechanic doesn't make up for having no collateral and questionable credit." They finished picking up the broken pieces in silence, and Sophia found herself thinking about the phone call she had been avoiding for 3 weeks. Her father's lawyers had been trying to reach her, leaving increasingly urgent voicemails about trust funds and inheritance issues that she had deleted without listening to completely. At the time, cutting all ties with Victor Donovan's money had felt like the principled thing to do. Now, watching Daniel's dreams crumble for lack of capital, she could access with a single phone call, her pride felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. As they walked back toward the house, Sophia's mind raced with possibilities. She had been raised in a world where money solved problems, where the right connections could open any door. For the first time since her father had disowned her, she found herself wondering if there might be a way to use that world to help the people she had come to love. "Daddy looks sad," Ella observed when they returned to the kitchen. She had finished her pancakes and was now carefully packing her school backpack with the methodical precision of someone twice her age. "Sometimes grown-ups have worries that make them feel heavy," Sophia explained, helping Ella into her winter coat. "But that doesn't mean anything is wrong with you or that Daddy loves you any less." "I know that," Ella said, with the matter-of-fact confidence of a child who had never doubted her father's love. "Maybe we should do something special to cheer him up. Like when I made him that card when he was sick with the flu." The suggestion planted a seed in Sophia's mind, though she wasn't sure yet what form it might take. As she walked Ella to the school bus stop, she found herself really looking at the neighborhood for the first time in days. The houses were small but well-maintained, with the kind of character that came from decades of families putting down roots. Children played in yards that had been home to multiple generations, and neighbors stopped to chat with genuine familiarity. It was everything her father's gated community had never been: real, warm, connected. The thought of Daniel having to uproot Ella from this place of them, having to start over somewhere else because he couldn't afford to chase his dreams, made Sophia's chest ache with protective fury. After the bus pulled away, Sophia walked slowly back to the house, her mind churning with half-formed plans. She had 3 hours before Ella got home from school, 3 hours to make some phone calls that might change everything. Daniel had already left for work, but his presence lingered in the coffee cup left in the sink. The newspaper folded to the job listings, the faint scent of his aftershave in the hallway. Over the past 3 weeks, Sophia had learned to read the signs of his moods in these small details. Today, they spoke of a man who was trying to prepare himself for disappointment. She settled at the kitchen table with her phone staring at the screen for several long minutes before finally dialing the number she had memorized but never wanted to use. Donovan Holdings. Mr. Donovan's office, came the crisp voice of her father's assistant. Hello, Margaret. It's Sophia. I need to speak with my father. There was a pause that stretched long enough for Sophia to wonder if the call had been disconnected. When Margaret spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. I'm sorry, Miss Donovan, but Mr. Donovan has made it clear that he's not available to speak with you. Sophia had expected this, but it still felt like a physical blow. Then please connect me with James Morrison in legal. Tell him it's about the trust fund arrangements. 20 minutes later, Sophia hung up the phone with a mixture of triumph and nausea. The conversation with her father's lawyer had been clinical and precise, focused entirely on financial instruments and legal procedures. But the bottom line was clear: she still had access to the trust fund. Her grandmother had established money that her father couldn't touch, even in his rage. The amount was more than enough to help Daniel buy the garage, but accessing it would mean re-entering a world she had sworn to leave behind. It would mean lawyers and contracts and the kind of financial entanglements that had defined her entire life until 3 weeks ago. More importantly, it would mean telling Daniel the truth about exactly how much money she had access to, a conversation she had been dreading since the day she arrived on his doorstep. How could she explain that while he struggled to make ends meet, she had been sitting on enough money to solve all his problems? How could she make him understand that the money felt tainted, connected to a life that had brought her nothing but misery? The sound of the front door opening interrupted her spiraling thoughts, and Sophia looked up to see Mrs. Rodriguez entering with her usual collection of grocery bags and knowing smiles. You look like someone who's been wrestling with the weight of the world, the older woman observed, settling her bags on the counter and fixing Sophia with a penetrating stare. Just thinking about some things, Sophia replied, hoping her voice sounded more casual than she felt. Mrs. Rodriguez had an uncanny ability to see through pretense, a skill honed by decades of caring for other people's families. She moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, putting away groceries, while keeping one eye on Sophia's increasingly agitated movements. Want to talk about it? She asked, settling into the chair across from Sophia with a cup of tea. Sometimes an outside perspective helps. Sophia found herself spilling the entire story: Daniel's dream of owning the garage, the competing buyer with cash, and her own complicated relationship with money that could solve everything if she could figure out how to offer it without destroying the trust they had built. Mrs. Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When Sophia finished, the older woman sat quietly for several minutes, stirring her tea with the kind of deliberate movements that suggested deep thought. You know, she said finally, I've been watching that man carry the weight of the world on his shoulders for 3 years. He's so used to doing everything alone that he's forgotten how to let people help him. But this is different, Sophia protested. This isn't just help, this is life-changing money. Money that comes with strings attached to a world he doesn't understand. Is it? Mrs. Rodriguez asked gently. Or is it just resources that could be used to help someone you care about achieve something important? The simple reframing hit Sophia like a revelation. She had been so focused on the source of the money and her own complicated feelings about it that she hadn't considered the most important question: what would be best for Daniel and Ella. He's proud, Sophia said. He won't want to take what he sees as charity. Then don't offer it as charity, Mrs. Rodriguez replied with a knowing smile. Offer it as an investment, Offer it as a partnership. Offer it as anything except what he's afraid it might be pity from someone who thinks he can't make it on his own. They spent the next hour crafting a plan that was equal parts business proposition and emotional navigation. Mrs. Rodriguez had a shrewd understanding of both Daniel's psychology and the practical realities of small business ownership. By the time Ella's bus pulled up outside, Sophia felt like she had a roadmap for a conversation that might change all of their lives. Ella bounded through the front door with her usual enthusiasm, her cheeks red from the cold and her backpack bulging with the day's artistic endeavors. "Sophia, guess what happened at school today?" she announced, not pausing for breath. "Tommy Martinez brought his hamster for show and tell, and it escaped and ran all around the classroom, and Mrs. Patterson had to crawl under her desk to catch it, and she made a really funny squeaking sound." "That sounds like quite an adventure," Sophia said, helping Ella out of her coat and backpack. "Did you have a good day otherwise?" "The best day," Ella confirmed. "Oh, and I made something for Daddy. Want to see?" She produced a construction paper card, decorated with glitter stickers and what appeared to be a drawing of their house. Inside, in Ella's careful kindergarten handwriting, were the words, "I love you, Daddy. You are the best." "It's beautiful," Sophia said, feeling her throat tighten with emotion. "Daddy is going to love it." "I made it because you said he was feeling heavy with worries," Ella explained. "Mrs. Patterson says that love makes everything lighter." The simple wisdom of Mrs. Patterson's observation stayed with Sophia as they went through their afternoon routine. She helped Ella with homework, supervised a snack that turned into an impromptu art project, and started dinner preparations while fielding a constant stream of chatter about playground politics and classroom drama. When Daniel's truck pulled into the driveway at 6:15, Sophia felt her heart begin to race. She had rehearsed the conversation a dozen times in her head, but now that the moment was approaching, all her carefully planned words seemed to evaporate. "Daddy's home!" Ella shrieked, racing to the window to watch him gather his tools from the truck bed. He looked exhausted. Sophia noted watching him move with the careful precision of someone whose body was reminding him of every hour he had worked that day. But when he walked through the front door and was immediately tackled by an enthusiastic 5-year-old, his face transformed with the kind of joy that made Sophia's chest ache. "How's my favorite girl?" he asked, scooping Ella up for a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "I made you something," Ella announced, wriggling to be put down so she could present her card with appropriate ceremony. Daniel's reaction to the homemade gift was everything Sophia had hoped for, and more. His face softened as he read Ella's carefully printed words, and when he looked up, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "This is the most beautiful card I've ever received," he said solemnly. "I'm going to put it on the refrigerator where I can see it every morning." "Sophia helped me spell some of the words," Ella confessed. "But the love part was all my idea." "The love part is the most important part," Daniel agreed, ruffling his daughter's hair. "Thank you, sweetheart. This makes everything better." Over dinner, Daniel seemed more relaxed than he had in days. He listened to Ella's detailed account of the hamster escape with appropriate amazement, and he complimented the chicken casserole that Sophia had somehow managed not to burn. But Sophia could see the tension lurking beneath the surface, the way his smiles didn't quite reach his eyes. After Ella was settled in bed with her nightly quota of stories, Daniel and Sophia found themselves in the living room with the kind of charged silence that had become familiar over the past few weeks. They had fallen into the habit of these evening conversations, sharing the details of their days and gradually revealing more of themselves to each other. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, Sophia had something to say that would either bring them closer together or destroy the fragile trust they had built. "Daniel," she began, then stopped, her carefully rehearsed words tangling on her tongue. He looked up from the automotive magazine he had been pretending to read, his expression alert to the serious tone in her voice. "What is it?" he asked gently. "You look like you're about to tell me someone died." "I want to talk to you about the garage," Sophia said, diving in before she could lose her nerve. "About Murphy's offer and the other buyer." Daniel's expression immediately shuddered, and he set down the magazine with careful precision. "Sophia, if this is about money—" "It is about money," she interrupted, "but not the way you think. Please, just hear me out." She had promised herself that she would be completely honest, no matter how difficult the conversation became. So she told him everything about the trust fund, about the lawyer's calls she had been ignoring, about the amount of money she could access if she was willing to navigate the legal complexities. Daniel listened in silence, his face growing more and more still, as the scope of her financial resources became clear. When she finished, he was quiet for so long that Sophia began to wonder if he was ever going to speak again. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "You've been sitting here for 3 weeks, watching me worry about bills and stress about the future, knowing that you could write a check that would solve all my problems. It's not that simple, isn't it?" Daniel stood up abruptly, beginning to pace the small living room with agitated energy. "Jesus, Sophia, do you have any idea how this feels? To find out that the person I've been confiding in, the person I've been worried about taking advantage of, has more money than I'll make in my entire lifetime." "The money doesn't feel like mine," Sophia said desperately. "It's tied to a life I don't want, to a family that threw me away. I never wanted you to see me as someone who could solve your problems with a checkbook." "But that's exactly what you are, isn't it?" Daniel's voice was rising, and Sophia was grateful that Ella was a heavy sleeper. "You're Victor Donovan's daughter, playing at being normal for a few weeks before you go back to your real life." The accusation hit Sophia like a physical blow. "That's not fair, and you know it. This is my real life now. You and Ella are the most real thing that's ever happened to me." "Are we?" Daniel stopped pacing and fixed her with a stare that felt like it was looking straight through her. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me since the day you showed up here." "I never lied to you," Sophia said, fighting back tears. "I told you I was Victor Donovan's daughter. I told you he had disowned me. I just didn't mention the trust fund because it didn't feel relevant." "Didn't feel relevant?" Daniel's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Sophia, I've been beating myself up for weeks about how little I can pay you, worried that you were sacrificing too much to help us. And the whole time you've been sitting on enough money to buy 10 garages. "I don't want 10 garages," Sophia said, standing up to face him. "I want this. I want you and Ella and this house and this life. The money is it's just a tool. It doesn't define who I am or what I want." "Easy to say when you've never been without it," Daniel shot back. "You have no idea what it's like to lie awake at night wondering if you're going to be able to keep a roof over your daughter's head. You've never had to choose between fixing your car and buying groceries. This isn't a game for me, Sophia. This is my life." "I know that," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "That's why I want to help. That's why I called the lawyers today and started the process of accessing the trust fund. Not because I pity you, but because I love you." The words hung in the air between them, more shocking for being unplanned. Sophia hadn't meant to say them, hadn't even fully acknowledged the depth of her feelings to herself. But now they were out there, raw and honest and terrifying. Daniel stared at her as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "You love me," he repeated flatly. "Yes," Sophia said, lifting her chin with the kind of defiant courage she had learned from watching him face impossible odds every day. "I love you, and I love Ella, and I love the life we've built together over the past 3 weeks. And if that means I want to use money that I never asked for to help the man I love achieve his dreams, then I'm not going to apologize for that." "You don't even know me," Daniel said, but his voice had lost some of its anger. "3 weeks ago, I was a stranger. How can you be talking about love?" "Because in 3 weeks, you've shown me more kindness and respect than I received in 25 years of living with my father," Sophia replied. "Because I've watched you parent Ella with a patience and devotion that takes my breath away. Because you work yourself to exhaustion every day without complaining, because you see the best in people even when they disappoint you, because you made room in your life for a broken stranger and never once made me feel like a burden." Daniel's expression was shifting, the anger giving way to something more complicated. "Sophia, I'm not trying to buy your affection," she continued, pressing her advantage. "I'm not trying to rescue you or fix your problems. I'm trying to be your partner. I'm trying to invest in our future, not just yours." "Our future," Daniel repeated, and there was something wondering in his voice. "If you want one," Sophia said quietly. "If you can see past the money and the complications and just see me, just see us." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and rough with emotion. "I've been falling in love with you since the night you showed up on my doorstep," he admitted. "Scared and desperate and braver than anyone I'd ever met. And I've been terrified that you'd figure out you could do better and leave." "There is no better," Sophia said, taking a step toward him. "There's just this. There's just us." Daniel reached for her, then pulling her into his arms with the kind of desperate intensity that spoke of weeks of held-back emotion. Sophia melted into his embrace, feeling like she had finally come home after a lifetime of wandering. "I'm scared," Daniel whispered against her hair. "I'm scared of what this means. Scared of what people will think, scared that I'm going to mess this up somehow." "We'll figure it out together," Sophia promised. "All of it. The garage, the money, the future. Everything." They held each other in the quiet living room, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of family life, and Sophia felt something settle in her chest that she had never experienced before. It was peace, she realized. It was the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. When they finally pulled apart, Daniel's eyes were bright with unshed tears and something that looked like hope. "So," he said, his voice still rough with emotion, "tell me about this investment opportunity you're proposing." Sophia smiled, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Well, Mr. Cross, I happen to know of a very promising automotive repair business that's about to come on the market. The owner is reliable, hardworking, and has an excellent reputation with his customers. I think it might be worth our consideration." "Our consideration," Daniel repeated, and this time when he smiled, it reached his eyes. "I like the sound of that." As they settled back onto the couch to discuss the practical details of purchasing Murphy's garage, Sophia felt the last pieces of her old life finally falling away. She was no longer Victor Donovan's daughter, or Marcus's disappointing girlfriend, or the lost woman who had appeared on Daniel's doorstep 3 weeks ago. She was Sophia Donovan, Daniel's partner, and Ella's chosen family, and she was finally completely home. The morning light streaming through the kitchen windows caught the diamond on Sophia's left hand, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the breakfast table. 3 months had passed since that pivotal night, when she and Daniel had finally laid their hearts bare, and the engagement ring he had given her 2 weeks ago still felt like a beautiful dream she might wake up from at any moment. "Are you nervous about today?" Daniel asked, refilling her coffee cup with the careful attention he had been showing her all week. His own hands weren't entirely steady, and Sophia could see the tension in the set of his shoulders despite his attempt at casual conversation. "Terrified," Sophia admitted, watching Ella methodically arrange her cereal into perfect rows. "I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong." Today was the day Victor Donovan was coming to meet Daniel and Ella. After weeks of legal negotiations, tense phone calls, and carefully worded letters from lawyers, Sophia's father had finally agreed to what he termed a civilized discussion about the situation. Sophia knew it was more likely to be an interrogation designed to find weaknesses in Daniel's character and reasons to disapprove of their relationship. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of changes that still left Sophia breathless when she stopped to think about them. Daniel now owned Murphy's Auto Repair, renamed Cross Family Automotive, and business was thriving beyond their wildest expectations. Word had spread quickly through the neighborhood about the quality of his work and his fair pricing, and they were booked solid for the next 6 weeks. More importantly, they had settled into a rhythm as a family that felt as natural as breathing. Sophia had moved into the master bedroom 6 weeks ago, and her belongings were now scattered throughout the house with the comfortable familiarity of someone who truly belonged. Her expensive clothes hung next to Daniel's work shirts in the closet, and her books were mixed in with Ella's picture books on the living room shelves. "Daddy, why is Sophia's daddy coming to visit?" Ella asked, looking up from her cereal with the frank curiosity that never failed to amaze both adults. "Is he nice like you?" Daniel and Sophia exchanged a look over Ella's head. They had been dreading this question for days, trying to figure out how to explain the complexities of family dynamics to a 6-year-old who had only ever known unconditional love from her father. "He's different from Daddy," Sophia said carefully. "He's used to being in charge of everything, and he likes things to be done a certain way. He might seem a little serious at first." "Will he like me?" Ella asked, with the vulnerability that always made Sophia's chest tighten with protective love. "Anyone who doesn't like you would have to be crazy," Daniel said firmly, reaching over to smooth Ella's hair. "And if he doesn't appreciate how amazing you are, that's his loss, not yours." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into their driveway, and Sophia felt her stomach drop as she recognized the low purr of her father's Bentley. Through the kitchen window, she could see the sleek black car that cost more than most people's houses, looking almost obscenely out of place on their modest street. "He's here," she whispered, suddenly feeling like she might be sick. Daniel was beside her in an instant, his hand warm and steady on her rug. "We've got this," he said quietly. "Remember, we're not asking for his permission. We're just introducing him to his future son-in-law and granddaughter." Victor Donovan emerged from the car with the kind of commanding presence that had made him a legend in Chicago business circles. At 62, he was still imposing, tall and silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly mortgage payment. His pale blue eyes, so similar to Sophia's, swept over the house and neighborhood with the calculating assessment of someone used to measuring everything in terms of value and potential. Sophia opened the front door before he could knock, her heart hammering against her ribs as she faced the man who had once been her entire world. "Hello, Father," she said, proud that her voice remained steady. Victor studied her for a long moment, and Sophia was acutely aware of how different she must look to him. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly styled hair that had once been her armor. Instead, she wore jeans and one of Daniel's sweaters, and her hair was pulled back in the simple ponytail that had become her trademark. She looked younger, happier, more real than she had in years. "Sophia," Victor said finally, his voice giving nothing away. "You look different." "I look like myself," Sophia replied, stepping back to allow him entry. "Please come in. I'd like you to meet my family." The word family hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Victor was clearly still processing. He stepped into their living room, and Sophia watched him take in the comfortable chaos of their lives. Ella's toys scattered across the coffee table, Daniel's automotive magazines stacked on the side table, the dozens of photographs that documented their life together. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, Ella trailing behind him, with the shy curiosity she reserved for strangers. Sophia felt a surge of pride as she watched her fiancé approach her father with quiet confidence. He had changed out of his work clothes into khakis and a button-down shirt, but he made no attempt to hide who he was or where he came from. "Mr. Donovan," Daniel said, extending his hand with the kind of steady eye contact that spoke of a man who had nothing to hide. "I'm Daniel Cross. Thank you for coming." Victor shook the offered hand, and Sophia could see him evaluating everything about Daniel, his firm grip, his direct gaze, the calluses that spoke of years of honest work. "Mr. Cross, I've heard quite a bit about you." "All good things, I hope," Daniel replied with a slight smile. "And this is my daughter, Ella." Ella stepped forward with the careful politeness they had been practicing all week. "Hello, Mr. Donovan. It's nice to meet you." Victor looked down at the small girl with an expression Sophia couldn't quite read. Ella stared back with the fearless curiosity of childhood, apparently unbothered by the intimidating presence that had terrified business rivals for decades. "Hello, Ella," Victor said, his voice softer than Sophia had expected. "Sophia has told me wonderful things about you." "She tells us wonderful things about you too," Ella replied with the kind of innocent diplomacy that made both Daniel and Sophia fight back smiles. "Would you like to see my room? I have a dollhouse that Daddy built and lots of books." The offer seemed to catch Victor off guard, and for a moment the commanding businessman was replaced by a man who clearly had no experience with 6-year-olds. "Perhaps later," he said gently. "Right now I'd like to talk with your father and Sophia." They settled in the living room, and Sophia was acutely aware of the contrast between her father's expensive suit and the well-worn comfort of their furniture. Victor sat with the kind of perfect posture that spoke of years of boarding school training, while Daniel relaxed into his recliner with the easy confidence of a man in his own home. "So, Mr. Cross," Victor began, his voice taking on the tone Sophia remembered from countless business meetings. "Sophia tells me you own an automotive repair shop." "That's right," Daniel replied. "I've been a mechanic for 12 years, and I recently purchased the shop where I've been working. Business has been good. And before that, I served 6 years in the Army Automotive Repair Division. When I got out, I worked for various shops around the city before Murphy gave me a chance to learn the business side of things." Sophia watched her father process this information, seeing the calculations happening behind his pale eyes. She knew he was trying to fit Daniel into one of his preconceived categories and failing. "The military," Victor mused. "That's respectable. And your family background?" "My father was a factory worker. My mother was a nurse," Daniel said, without any trace of defensiveness. "They both worked hard to provide for me and my sister. They passed away in a car accident when I was 22. "I'm sorry for your loss," Victor said, and his tone held genuine sympathy. "That must have been difficult." "It was," Daniel acknowledged. "But it taught me early that family is the most important thing you can have, and that you should never take the people you love for granted." The pointed comment wasn't lost on Victor, and Sophia saw a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or recognition, cross her father's face. "And Ella's mother?" Victor asked, his voice carefully neutral. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. "My ex-wife left when Ella was 2. She decided that family life wasn't what she wanted. I've been raising Ella on my own since then." "That must be challenging," Victor observed. "Single parenthood running a business." "It is challenging," Daniel agreed. "But it's also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Ella is the best part of my life, and I'd do anything to give her the future she deserves." Victor turned to Sophia, his gaze intense and searching. "And you, Sophia, how do you fit into this picture?" The question she had been dreading. Sophia took a deep breath, drawing strength from Daniel's presence beside her. "I fit perfectly," she said simply. "Daniel and Ella have given me something I never had before, a real family. Not one based on obligation or appearances, but on genuine love and respect." "You had a family," Victor said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "You had everything anyone could want. Position, privilege, unlimited opportunities. I had loneliness." Sophia shot back, feeling years of suppressed hurt bubbling to the surface. "I had a father who only loved me when I was useful to his image, who treated me like a business asset instead of a daughter. I had wealth and privilege, but I never had a single person who loved me just for being myself." Victor flinched, as if she had struck him, and Sophia saw real pain flash across his face before his businessman's mask slipped back into place. "I gave you everything," he said quietly. "You gave me things," Sophia corrected. "You never gave me yourself. You never asked what I wanted or what made me happy. You just assumed that because I had money and status, I should be grateful and compliant." The room fell silent, except for the soft sounds of Ella playing in the kitchen. Victor stared at his daughter with an expression that was equal parts hurt and bewilderment, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time. "I thought I was protecting you," he said finally. "I thought I was giving you the best of everything." "The best of everything doesn't include love?" Daniel asked quietly. His voice held no judgment, just genuine curiosity. Victor turned to look at him, and Sophia could see her father struggling with concepts that had never been part of his worldview. "I loved her," Victor said defensively. I never learned how to show it. My own father was the same way. Business was what mattered. Success was what mattered. I thought if I could give her security and opportunity, that would be enough." "But it wasn't," Sophia said softly. "I would have traded all of it for one conversation where you asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. For one moment when you saw me as your daughter instead of your successor." Victor's composure was beginning to crack, and Sophia could see the man behind the businessman, someone who had spent so many years focusing on building an empire that he had forgotten to build relationships with the people who mattered most. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be a father instead of a CEO." "You start by being here," Daniel said gently. "You start by listening instead of planning. You start by asking questions about what makes the people you love happy." As if summoned by the mention of happiness, Ella appeared in the living room doorway, her face bright with excitement. "I finished my picture," she announced, holding up a crayon drawing that depicted what appeared to be a house surrounded by stick figures. "It's all of us together. See? There's Daddy and Sophia and me and our dog when we get one. And this is you, Mr. Donovan, because Sophia said you're part of our family too." She thrust the drawing toward Victor with the kind of proud enthusiasm that only children possess. Sophia watched her father take the paper with hands that weren't quite steady, studying the crayon figures with an intensity usually reserved for financial reports. "This is very good, Ella," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for including me." "Of course I included you," Ella said matter-of-factly. "You're Sophia's daddy, which means you're my family too. That's how families work." The simple wisdom of a 6-year-old seemed to hit Victor like a physical blow. He stared at the drawing for a long moment, and when he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Yes," he said quietly. "That is how families work." Over the next hour, something fundamental shifted in the dynamics of the room. Victor began to ask different kinds of questions, not the interrogating probes of a businessman, but the tentative inquiries of someone trying to understand a world he had never explored. He asked Daniel about his work, but also about his dreams for the future. He asked Sophia about her daily life, her happiness, her plans. Most surprisingly, he engaged with Ella in a way that revealed a grandfather she had never suspected existed. When she showed him her dollhouse, he examined it with the same attention he would give to an architectural blueprint, asking about the tiny furniture and listening to her elaborate stories about the dolls who lived there. "You built this yourself?" he asked Daniel, running his fingers along the carefully crafted wooden walls. "It was a Christmas project last year," Daniel replied. "Took me about 3 months of weekends, but seeing Ella's face when she opened it made every hour worth it." Victor nodded slowly, as if processing an entirely new concept of value and worth. As the afternoon wore on, Sophia found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't expected. This wasn't the cold, judgmental father she had feared facing. This was a man who was clearly struggling to understand a different way of living, but who was making a genuine effort to bridge the gap between their worlds. When Ella asked if Grandpa Victor could stay for dinner, the request seemed to surprise him as much as anyone. "I don't want to impose," he said, looking uncertain for perhaps the first time in his adult life. "You're not imposing," Sophia said, and meant it. "We'd like you to stay." Dinner was a revelation in ways none of them had expected. Victor insisted on helping set the table, following Ella's detailed instructions about which fork went where. He complimented Sophia's cooking with genuine appreciation, and he listened to Daniel's stories about difficult customers and mechanical challenges with the kind of engaged attention that made it clear he found the work genuinely interesting. "I've never thought much about what happens after I buy a car," Victor admitted over dessert. "It never occurred to me that keeping it running would require such skill and creativity." "Most people don't think about it until something breaks," Daniel said with a smile. "That's when they discover how much they depend on someone who understands how all the pieces fit together." "Like families," Ella piped up, apparently following her own logic. "All the pieces have to fit together, or everything stops working right." The adults exchanged glances across the table, struck by the accuracy of her observation. After dinner, they settled back in the living room, and Victor surprised everyone by asking to see pictures of Sophia and Daniel's life together. They spent an hour going through photo albums with Sophia and Daniel, narrating the story of their courtship, and Victor asking questions that revealed his growing understanding of what his daughter had found. "You look happy," he said quietly, studying a picture of Sophia and Ella baking cookies, their faces covered in flour and bright with laughter. "I don't think I ever saw you look this happy before." "I never was this happy before," Sophia replied honestly. "I never knew it was possible to feel this settled, this complete." Victor was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photographs spread across the coffee table. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I owe you all an apology," he said. "Especially you, Sophia. I spent so many years trying to control your life because I thought I knew what was best for you. I never stopped to ask what you wanted, what would make you truly happy. You were doing what you thought was right, Sophia said gently. You were trying to protect me in the only way you knew how. But it wasn't right, was it? Victor looked around the room, taking in the comfortable chaos of their life together. This is right. This is what a family should look like. As the evening wound down and Victor prepared to leave, he pulled Daniel aside for a private conversation, while Sophia helped Ella get ready for bed. Mr. Cross, Victor began, his voice formal, but lacking its earlier edge. I want to thank you for taking care of my daughter. I'm not taking care of her, Daniel corrected gently. We're taking care of each other. That's what partners do. Victor nodded slowly, as if filing away another piece of information about this foreign concept of equal partnership. I also want to apologize for the way I reacted when I learned about your relationship, Victor continued. I made assumptions based on prejudices I didn't even realize I had. I judged you without knowing you, and that was wrong. We all make mistakes when we're protecting the people we love, Daniel replied. The important thing is that you're here now trying to understand. I want to be part of this, Victor said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they surprised Daniel. I want to know my granddaughter, and I want to be the kind of father Sophia deserves. I don't know how to do that, but I'm willing to learn. Then you're already halfway there, Daniel said with a smile. The rest is just showing up and being present. When Victor finally prepared to leave, Ella insisted on giving him a hug goodbye, wrapping her small arms around his legs, with the kind of unconscious affection that made the powerful businessman's eyes fill with tears. Will you come back soon, Grandpa Victor? She asked, looking up at him with wide, trusting eyes. If you'll have me, Victor replied, his voice rough with emotion. I'd like that very much. As they watched Victor's car disappear down the street, Sophia felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, all the pieces of her world seemed to fit together perfectly. Her past and her present, her family of origin and her chosen family, her old life and her new one. How do you feel? Daniel asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they stood in the doorway. Complete, Sophia said, leaning back against his chest. For the first time in my life, I feel completely whole. Inside the house, Ella was already chattering excitedly about all the things she wanted to show Grandpa Victor on his next visit. Her easy acceptance of this new family member was just another reminder of the generous heart that had made Sophia fall in love with this little girl from their very first meeting. As they settled into their evening routine baths and bedtime stories and quiet conversations in the lamplight, Sophia marveled at how naturally her father had fit into their world once he stopped trying to change it to match his expectations. Perhaps Mrs. Rodriguez had been right when she said that families weren't about perfection, but about showing up and choosing to love each other despite the complications. Later that night, as she and Daniel lay in bed discussing the day's events, Sophia felt a gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness. For what? Daniel asked, his voice drowsy with contentment. For giving me a family worth fighting for, Sophia replied. For showing me what love actually looks like. For making me brave enough to believe I deserved this kind of happiness. Daniel pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You don't have to thank me for loving you, Sophia. That's the easiest thing I've ever done. As she drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who had saved her from a life of hollow privilege, Sophia thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a lost woman standing in the snow, desperate and alone. Now she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by love that asked for nothing but her authentic self in return. The broken billionaire's daughter had finally found her home, and it was everything she had never dared to dream it could become. Part 5. 1 year later, Sophia stood at the kitchen window watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across their backyard, where Daniel was teaching Ella how to change the oil in her bicycle chain. The sight never failed to make her smile. Father and daughter bent over the small bike with identical expressions of concentration. Daniel patiently explaining each step while Ella asked a steady stream of questions that would have exhausted a lesser man. "Mrs. Cross, your coffee is getting cold," Mrs. Rodriguez called from the breakfast table using the name that still sent a thrill through Sophia's chest every time she heard it. The wedding had been 6 months ago, a small ceremony in their backyard, with only the people who truly mattered. Ella had been the flower girl, scattering rose petals with the kind of dramatic flair that had made everyone laugh and cry at the same time. Victor had walked Sophia down the aisle, tears streaming down his face as he officially welcomed Daniel into their family. Mrs. Rodriguez had sobbed through the entire ceremony, declaring it the most beautiful wedding she had ever attended. Now, as Sophia settled at the table with her coffee and the morning newspaper, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed. The guest room had been converted into a proper home office where she managed the business side of cross-family automotive, her MBA finally put to use in a way that felt meaningful. The garage was thriving beyond their wildest dreams with a waiting list that stretched 3 months and a reputation for honesty that had earned them customers from across the city. "I still can't believe how much that place has grown," Mrs. Rodriguez said, following Sophia's gaze to where Daniel was now letting Ella take over the more complex parts of the bicycle maintenance. "When I think about how worried he used to be about making ends meet, it's amazing what can happen when someone believes in you," Sophia replied, thinking about all the ways Daniel had encouraged her to use her business skills, how he had trusted her judgment, even when her suggestions seemed risky. They had hired 3 full-time mechanics and 2 part-time administrative assistants, turning what had been a struggling one-man operation into a thriving small business. But more importantly, they had created something that felt like an extension of their family, a place where employees were treated with respect and customers knew they could trust the work being done. The success had brought its own challenges, of course. There were days when Daniel worked 14 hours straight because he refused to compromise on quality, and nights when Sophia fell asleep over spreadsheets and customer accounts. But they had learned to navigate the pressures together, supporting each other through the inevitable stresses that came with building something from the ground up. "Mama Sophia!" Ella's voice rang across the yard, using the name she had started calling Sophia shortly after the wedding. "Come see, I fixed it all by myself." Sophia's heart clenched with the familiar mixture of joy and overwhelming love that Ella's enthusiasm always inspired. The adoption papers had been finalized 2 months ago, making official what had been true in their hearts since that first snowy night. Sophia was now legally Ella's mother, a role she had never imagined wanting, but couldn't imagine living without. Outside, Ella was beaming with pride as she demonstrated her newly acquired mechanical skills spinning the bicycle chain with the satisfaction of someone who had mastered a complex piece of technology. "That's perfect, sweetheart," Sophia said, crouching down to examine Ella's work. "You're getting to be as good a mechanic as Daddy." "Maybe even better," Daniel said with a grin ruffling his daughter's hair. "She's definitely more patient with stubborn bolts than I am." They were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into their driveway, and Sophia looked up to see Victor's Bentley gliding to a stop behind Daniel's truck. Her father had become a regular fixture in their lives over the past year, visiting every Sunday for family dinner and occasionally stopping by during the week just to spend time with his granddaughter. The transformation in Victor had been remarkable to witness. The man who had once measured every relationship in terms of business advantage now delighted in Ella's finger-painted artwork and had learned to play board games with the kind of competitive intensity he had once reserved for corporate takeovers. He had even started volunteering at a local literacy program, claiming that Ella had inspired him to help other children learn to love reading. "Grandpa Victor!" Ella shrieked, abandoning her bicycle to race toward her grandfather with the kind of uncomplicated joy that never failed to light up his face. "Hello, my dear," Victor said, scooping Ella up for their traditional bear hug. "I brought you something." He produced a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket, and Ella's eyes widened with anticipation. Over the past year, Victor had learned the art of gift-giving for children, not the expensive, elaborate presents he had once favored, but small, thoughtful tokens that showed he had been paying attention to her interests. "It's a new book," Ella announced after tearing off the wrapping paper. "About a girl who builds robots, thank you, Grandpa Victor. I thought you might like it," Victor said, his voice warm with satisfaction. The librarian at the literacy center recommended it specifically for curious young ladies who like to figure out how things work. As they made their way back toward the house, Victor fell into step beside Daniel, and Sophia noticed the easy familiarity that had developed between them over the months. Her father had genuinely grown to respect and admire Daniel, not just as Sophia's husband, but as a man whose values and work ethic he found inspiring. "How's the new expansion coming along?" Victor asked, referring to the additional service bay they were adding to accommodate their growing business. "Ahead of schedule and under budget," Daniel replied with obvious pride. "Sophia's project management skills are putting my old approach to shame." "She gets that from her mother," Victor said quietly, a note of sadness creeping into his voice. "Margaret always had a gift for organization and efficiency. I think she would have been proud of what Sophia has accomplished." It was the first time Victor had mentioned Sophia's mother in months, and Sophia felt the familiar pang of loss for the woman she had barely known. Margaret Donovan had died when Sophia was only 3, and Victor had rarely spoken of her as if her memory was too painful to share. Inside the house, they settled into their usual Sunday morning routine. Ella curled up in Victor's lap to read her new book, while Daniel and Sophia prepared brunch, working together with the kind of seamless coordination that spoke of countless mornings spent this way. "I have some news to share," Victor said, as they gathered around the kitchen table. His tone was carefully neutral, but Sophia could see excitement lurking in his eyes. "Good news or bad news?" Ella asked with the directness that always made the adults smile. "Good news, I think," Victor replied. "I've been talking with some investors about a new project, and I wanted to run it by all of you before making any decisions." Sophia felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Over the past year, she had learned to trust her father's judgment, but his business ventures still made her nervous. Too many years of watching him prioritize profit over people had left scars that were slow to heal. "What kind of project?" Daniel asked, his voice carefully neutral. Victor's eyes sparkled with the kind of enthusiasm Sophia hadn't seen since she was a child. "A community automotive training center. A place where young people could learn practical skills while also getting exposure to business management and customer service. Sort of a combination trade school and small business incubator." The idea hit Sophia like a revelation. It was exactly the kind of project that combined Victor's business expertise with values that actually mattered, helping people build better lives for themselves while addressing a real need in the community. "That's brilliant," she said, leaning forward with growing excitement. "There's such a shortage of skilled mechanics, and so many young people who could benefit from hands-on training." I was hoping you might consider being involved, Victor continued, looking between Daniel and Sophia. Not as employees, but as partners. Your garage could serve as one of the practicum sites, and Daniel could help develop the curriculum. Sophia, your business management experience would be invaluable for setting up the program structure. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Sophia could see him turning the idea over in his mind. She knew he was thinking about the time commitment, the potential complications, the risk of overextending themselves when their own business was still growing. How many students would we be talking about? He asked finally. Starting small, Victor replied. Maybe 15 or 20 in the first cohort. Young adults who are motivated to learn but haven't had access to traditional educational opportunities. Like kids who aged out of foster care, Sophia said, thinking about the statistics she had read about young adults who found themselves adrift after leaving the system. Or people who want to change careers but can't afford traditional vocational schools. Exactly, Victor said, his voice warming with passion. People who just need someone to believe in them and give them a chance. Ella looked up from her book, apparently following the conversation, despite the adult subject matter. Like when you gave Mama Sophia a chance, Daddy, she asked, with the kind of innocent observation that always cuts straight to the heart of things. Daniel's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. Yes, sweetheart. Exactly like that. The conversation continued through brunch and into the afternoon, with Victor outlining his vision for the training center and Daniel asking increasingly detailed questions about curriculum and logistics. Sophia found herself getting caught up in the excitement, imagining the impact they could have on people's lives. By evening, they had sketched out the rough framework for a partnership that would involve cross-family automotive providing real-world training opportunities, while Victor's foundation handled the funding and administrative structure. It was ambitious and challenging, and exactly the kind of project that felt like a natural extension of the values that had brought them all together. I can't believe we're actually going to do this, Sophia said later that night as she and Daniel cleaned up the kitchen. A year ago I was sleeping in your guest room and hoping you wouldn't change your mind about giving me a job. Now we're talking about training the next generation of mechanics. A year ago I was working alone in Murphy's garage, worried about making the rent, Daniel replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Now I have a wife who challenges me to dream bigger than I ever thought possible. They stood together in their kitchen, surrounded by the comfortable evidence of their life together, Ella's artwork on the refrigerator, family photos covering every surface, the lingering warmth of an afternoon spent with people they loved. Through the window, Sophia could see the lights beginning to come on in their neighbors' houses, other families settling into their evening routines. Are you happy? Daniel asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Happier than I ever imagined I could be, Sophia replied, leaning back against his chest. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. It's real, Daniel said softly. We're real. This family is real. And tomorrow we're going to wake up and do it all again. 3 months later, Sophia stood in the main classroom of the Victor and Margaret Donovan Community Automotive Training Center, watching Daniel demonstrate proper engine diagnostic procedures to a group of eager students. The facility was everything they had dreamed it could be. Modern equipment, experienced instructors, and a cohort of students who approached their studies with the kind of hunger that came from knowing this opportunity could change their lives. Among the students was Maria Santos, a 19-year-old, who had aged out of foster care and was living in transitional housing while trying to build a future for herself. There was James Mitchell, a 42-year-old factory worker, whose plant had closed, leaving him desperate to learn new skills. And Sarah Chen, a military veteran, who wanted to translate her mechanical aptitude into a civilian career. Each student had a story, and each story reminded Sophia of her own journey, from desperation to hope. She had taken over much of the day-to-day administration of the program, using her business skills to track student progress, manage partnerships with local employers, and secure additional funding for scholarships. "Mrs. Cross, I got the job." Maria burst into the office, waving a letter with barely contained excitement. "Henderson's Auto hired me as an apprentice mechanic. They said they were impressed with my diagnostic skills and my customer service training." Sophia felt tears spring to her eyes as she stood to embrace the young woman who had become like a daughter to her over the past months. Maria had been one of their most dedicated students, often staying late to practice techniques and asking thoughtful questions that showed her deep commitment to mastering her craft. "I'm so proud of you," Sophia said, meaning every word. "You've worked incredibly hard for this." "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Maria replied, her own eyes bright with tears. "You and Mr. Cross and Mr. Donovan, you all believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." The success stories were multiplying weekly now. James had been hired by a commercial trucking company, and Sarah had started her own mobile repair service specializing in motorcycles. More importantly, the students were forming connections with each other, creating a support network that extended far beyond their time in the program. That evening, the entire extended family gathered for their traditional Sunday dinner, now expanded to include Mrs. Rodriguez's nephew Carlos, who had become Daniel's newest full-time mechanic, and occasionally one or two students from the training center, who had nowhere else to go for a home-cooked meal. "I have an announcement," Ella said, as they cleared the dinner dishes, her 7-year-old voice carrying the kind of dramatic importance that made all the adults stop what they were doing to listen. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sophia asked, settling into her chair with the patient attention that Ella's announcements always deserved. "I've decided what I want to be when I grow up," Ella declared with the certainty that only children possess. "I want to be a mechanical engineer so I can design cars that run on sunshine and never break down. And I want to teach kids how to fix things like Daddy and Mama Sophia do." The room fell silent for a moment as the adults processed this announcement. Then Victor began to laugh, a sound of pure joy that filled the kitchen with warmth. "That sounds like a perfect plan," he said, reaching over to ruffle Ella's hair. "I think you're going to change the world, my dear." "We all are," Ella replied with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who had grown up watching the adults in her life prove that anything was possible with enough love and determination. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and Ella was tucked safely in bed, Sophia and Daniel sat on their front porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the clear September sky. The house behind them was quiet and peaceful, filled with the accumulated evidence of 4 years of building a life together. "Do you ever miss it?" Daniel asked quietly. "The old life, I mean. The luxury, the simplicity of having everything taken care of for you." Sophia considered the question, thinking about the woman she had been when she first knocked on this door. That woman had been surrounded by luxury, but starved for connection, wealthy beyond measure, but desperately poor in the things that actually mattered. "Never," she said finally. "I might miss having a staff to do the laundry sometimes, but I wouldn't trade this chaos for all the quiet luxury in the world. Even when Ella decides to help with cooking, and we end up with flour in places flour should never be, especially then." Sophia laughed. "Those are the moments when I feel most alive, most real, most myself." They swung gently in comfortable silence, and Sophia thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 4 years ago, she had been a broken woman, standing in a snowstorm, convinced that her life was over. Now she was surrounded by love, purpose, and the kind of deep satisfaction that came from building something meaningful with people who mattered. The training center was expanding, to include programs in electrical work and plumbing. Cross-family automotive had a reputation that extended throughout the city, with customers who trusted them completely and employees who felt like family. Ella was thriving in school, confident and curious, and surrounded by adults who supported her dreams, no matter how ambitious they might be. Most importantly, Sophia had learned the difference between being wanted and being loved, between being useful and being valued. Daniel loved her for exactly who she was, strengths and weaknesses, past mistakes and future dreams all included. Ella had chosen her as a mother, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Victor had rebuilt their relationship on a foundation of genuine respect and affection, rather than obligation and expectation. "Thank you," Sophia said, suddenly reaching for Daniel's hand in the darkness. "For what this time?" he asked, though his voice held the warmth of someone who never tired of being appreciated. "For seeing me," she replied. "For seeing past the designer clothes and the trust fund and the mess I was when I showed up here. For seeing the person I could become if someone just gave me a chance." "I didn't give you a chance," Daniel corrected gently. "I gave you a home. You created your own chances." Inside the house, a light came on in Ella's room, followed by the soft padding of small feet across the hallway floor. A moment later, she appeared on the porch in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I had a bad dream," she said, climbing into Sophia's lap, with the unconscious trust of a child who had never doubted that comfort would be available when she needed it. "What was it about, sweetheart?" Sophia asked, wrapping her arms around her daughter and breathing in the familiar scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood innocence. "I dreamed that you went away like my first mommy did." Ella whispered, her voice small and vulnerable in the darkness. "I was looking for you everywhere, but I couldn't find you." Sophia's heart clenched with protective love so fierce it took her breath away. "Oh, baby, I'm never going away. Never, ever, ever. You're stuck with me for the rest of your life, whether you like it or not." "Promise?" Ella asked, looking up at Sophia with eyes that held all the trust in the world. "I promise," Sophia said solemnly. "Cross my heart and hope to die, stick a needle in my eye, promise. You are my daughter, and I am your mother, and nothing in this world could ever change that." "What if you get old and wrinkled and forget who I am?" "Then you'll just have to remind me every day," Sophia replied with a smile. "But even if I forget everything else, I'll never forget how much I love you." Ella settled against Sophia's chest with a contented sigh, apparently satisfied by this reassurance. Within minutes, she was breathing with the deep, even rhythm of sleep, completely secure in the knowledge that she was safe and loved. "We should probably get her back to bed," Daniel said quietly, but neither he nor Sophia made any move to disturb the sleeping child. "In a minute," Sophia replied, savoring the weight of her daughter in her arms and the steady presence of her husband beside her. "I just want to remember this moment exactly as it is." The stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of time and the steady rhythm of their lives together. In the distance, the city hummed with its usual nighttime energy, but here on their front porch, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Sophia felt a peace so profound it bordered on reverence. This was what she had been searching for without knowing it, not wealth or status or approval from people who would never truly see her, but belonging. The chance to matter to people who mattered to her. The opportunity to build something lasting and beautiful with her own hands and heart. 4 years ago, a desperate woman had knocked on Daniel Cross's door in the middle of a snowstorm, hoping for nothing more than shelter from the cold. What she had found instead was a home, a family, and a love that had transformed her from the inside out. The broken billionaire's daughter was gone, replaced by a woman who knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. And as Sophia sat on her front porch holding her sleeping daughter, while her husband's hand rested warm and steady on her shoulder, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found everything she would ever need. The fairy tale was real, but it wasn't about a prince rescuing a princess or wealth solving every problem. It was about the miracle of ordinary love, the magic of chosen family, and the incredible power of second chances. It was about learning that sometimes the best things in life came not from having everything you thought you wanted, but from discovering what you actually needed. And what Sophia had needed, it turned out, was exactly this: a modest house on Maple Street, a man who loved her for who she really was, a daughter who had chosen her as much as she had chosen them, and the simple, extraordinary gift of belonging somewhere completely. The snow had long since melted, but the warmth remained and always would.